If you're playing Resident Evil 4, the remake, and you're not using this here controller to play it, well then you're doing it wrong. Well, not really, but it's a more satisfying experience if you've ever played the original Resident Evil 4 game on PS2 using this rather complicated controller. Now, I wasn't fortunate enough to own this when I was younger, but I did have a friend that owned it who used to play it on the PS2. Now, I thought he was a bit of a madman to try and play a third-person action horror game welding a mechanical tree-cutting device, but he pulled it off flawlessly, and while it looks rather cumbersome as, it pertains to, a tried and true form of a console controller, well, he did it with ease. So I figured, it makes sense to try to have this here controller return for another round in the newly rebuffed RE4 Remake. Now, Capcom apparently didn't have enough time to remake this here controller for the brand spanking new PS5 or a PC console because of the amount of time and effort put into the remake of RE4. But fortunately, there's adapters you can buy to rig this bad boy to work on your PS5 or probably your PC. But honestly, that's up to the modding community to try to figure out. I'm pretty sure there are some modders out there hard at work trying to figure out how to mod and get this particular controller, the RE4 Chainsaw controller, working on RE4 Remake, either on the PC or the PS5. I don't know how they do it, but I'm pretty sure they're gonna figure it out. It'll likely be very uncomfortable, but those that remember playing with this here controller, you can return to form with it and try to experience this new game using it. Now, I can't play a damn game properly with this thing, and I find it a little bit odd that, this was even made for Resident Evil 4. Just think about it, y'all, all right? Does Leon ever use a chainsaw in RE4? No! Why not make a Killer 7 controller? I mean, I'm sure a lot of fans of the cult classic Killer 7 video game would have loved to have something to use that kind of paid tribute and homage to one of Capcom's most ridiculously insane shooters of all time. Now, I get it though. This, is a pretty iconic weapon that the chainsaw Ganado uses, and it's really scary seeing that man come towards you with that sack of potatoes on his head with this here weapon. And all you have to parry it with is a pocket knife? I mean, that's freaking nuts. But you know what, back to the controller here and using it while experiencing RE4. It's probably not going to be an easy task for anyone that doesn't already own this here controller. I'll tell you why. This right here, first off, I just gotta let this known to everyone that's watching this. This is a bit of a loner. This is a loner for me. And the reason why is because I tried to buy it on Amazon and it's freaking $700. That's insane. The only thing I'd ever pay for that's close to that pertaining to gaming is a PSVR 2 or the PS5, which I did, and my bank account is still hurting. Still hasn't recovered. Nope. So if you have this here controller, if you don't want to play RE4 using it, well, you know what? See if you can get a few bucks on eBay for it. Or you know what? You can just keep it in that fancy display case to collect dust and break it out whenever you have friends over to show them how cool you are. While this will provide you with a pretty fun experience, it kind of seems like it might be outside the cost of a casual gamer. But honestly, you don't really need it to enjoy the RE4 Remake. But low-key, the fact that the devs didn't bring this back is a bit of a missed opportunity, especially if you're looking at making kitschy merchandise for RE4 Remake. But fortunately, Resident Evil 4 Remake's director did say that it's possible that sometime down the line, we might see the PS2 Chainsaw controller remake for PS5. And I'll tell you right now, if that does happen, it'll for sure be a hot commodity, regardless of whether or not you think this is a good idea or even a practical one. The functionality of the Resident Evil 4 controller, Chainsaw controller, is a bit wonky with its placement of buttons, but it truly does speak to the absurdity of the 2000s with the fact that it even exists. Because let's just face it, the Resident Evil 4 Chainsaw controller isn't that practical when you try to apply it to your gameplay session. I got killed so many different times while fighting villagers that I almost was so frustrated to the point that I wanted to smash this thing like Wings of Redemption style. I just can't take this shit no more, man. I wasn't gonna do that though. You know, I realized that this is a $700 controller that doesn't belong to me, and I'll be damned if I have to sell another pair of shoes on StockX to finance this silly expense. I already did that for the PSVR 2, but that was pretty worth it. The Resident Evil 4 Chainsaw controller, not so much. Unless you're balling and you got it like that. But it definitely is a unique experience worth you exploring if you have that opportunity. But the actual button mapping on this controller, on the Resident Evil 4 Chainsaw controller with RE4, honestly leaves a lot to be desired. For me, trying to play on the hardest difficulty level on Resident Evil 4 was a bit of a hassle due to the placement of some of the buttons. Like on a regular DualSense controller, the R1, R2, and L1, L2 buttons are conveniently placed, you know, where your index finger and middle fingers naturally sit on the controller. But on the Chainsaw controller, your index fingers rest on the L1 and R1 buttons, but you have to flick R2 and L2 buttons, which is kind of weird, and it's really not a natural thing to do, especially when you're in the heat of combat. Check this out, when you take this controller out of your hands, this is pretty much the placement of your hands. This is essentially how that controller looks in your hands. Essentially, it looks like, yeah, I look like freaking TK throwing up gang signs. This is not a natural or normal way to play any video game, but it's a great way to get initiated into a gang. Yeah, it's weird. But the Chainsaw controller is honestly more fun for those that have experienced the original RE4 game using it, because it almost transports you back in time to those crazy days in the early 2000s. I mean, pulling this handle right here, let me show you right here. Look at that. Pulling this handle right here and hearing the rev of the chainsaw as you start the game is so thrilling. It was quite a thrill back in the day. Like, this is probably the coolest controller newbie tech the manufacturer of the controller has ever made, next to the Zelda Twilight Princess controller for GameCube. I mean, it's definitely a must-have to provide you with a very unique experience you probably haven't had in a while since you started gaming. Now, this definitely won't be your daily driver in regards to gaming controllers, but it's nice to try and challenge yourself if you think you might be a Resident Evil 4 expert. Anyways, if you own this shiny, fancy Resident Evil 4 Chainsaw controller, let me know what your experience has been like with it. And if you actually attempted a playthrough of the remake using it, you get, I'll say you get like some T-Virus brownie points. All the T-Virus brownie points in the world. Also, you gotta stream that, baby, because I bet a lot of folks out there would wanna see a Resident Evil 4 remake playthrough using just this chainsaw controller. For me, I'm just gonna go and put this back in its display before I accidentally step on it and break it. But honestly, low-key, I don't know, I'm tempted to kind of sell it on eBay. I kind of am, because this is going for a pretty penny. I mean, again, there's only, what, 50,000 of them in existence? Hey, come on. I'm kidding, I'm not gonna sell this. No, of course not. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments down below. Definitely go check out my other video game related vids for more commentary similar to this. Until next time, I'll see you later. Peace.